reports and analysis from your game day crew. This is the Ducks Postgame Scoreboard Show on 1080 The Fan. Oregon Ducks football on 1080 The Fan is brought to you by Coors Light. Mountain Cold Refreshment. Choose chill. Celebrate responsibly. By Pacific Office Automation. Problem solved. By Mods PDX. The future of building is here. By ZoomCare. With more than 20 neighborhood clinics in Oregon and Southwest Washington, ZoomCare offers convenient access to same-day urgent and emergency care, plus an expanded primary care team, currently accepting new patients. Schedule or learn more at ZoomCare.com. Bellagio's Pizza. Dough and sauce made fresh 6 days a week, right here in Wilsonville. And proud to be serving Northwest communities since 1996. Order online or through the app. By Multnomah County Behavioral Health Division. Don't let the game play you. For more information on problem gambling prevention and treatment resources, visit opgr.org. By Victorico's Mexican Food. Order Victorico's for your game day celebration, in-store or online for pickup or delivery at victoricos.com. Legends Casino Hotel in Toppenish, within winning distance. Audi Wilsonville, offering unmatched service to help you find the perfect car. Online at AudiWilsonville.com. Laurelhurst Market, more than just your friendly neighborhood steakhouse. Make your reservation today at laurelhurstmarket.com. And by Langdon Farms Golf Club. There's no better course in the Northwest for year-round golf. Book your tee time at langdonfarms.com. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Buckley and Will Ortner. The Ducks Postgame Scoreboard Show on 1080 The Fan.
Welcome into the Ducks Postgame Scoreboard Show, brought to you by Pacific Office Automation. I'm Ryan Buckley. Across from me, Will Ortner. Behind the glass, Jordan Schultz. And gentlemen, for the first time this season, a victorious edition of the Ducks Postgame Scoreboard Show, albeit a little clunky. Wasn't maybe what everyone expected to see tonight, but it is a win. Your Oregon Ducks, number 3 in the country, they beat the Idaho Vandals 24-14. But we do need to get into some first reactions. And I know, Will, when we have had these conversations in the past, whether it is a doormat of a conference opponent, whether it is an early season non-conference opponent from either a smaller division or a smaller conference, you often say it's supposed to look a certain way. Right. That seemed like one of those types of games tonight where it should look a certain way. Did it?
No, absolutely not. Unless you're an Idaho fan, then it certainly looked like the standard you want to play at. No, for Oregon, frankly, I was disappointed in the offensive line play. I felt like you went in there with a lot of hype, and last year you had a bunch of guys who were transfers in. Right now you have 2 bookend tackles that people are talking about postseason awards. People are talking about them being high draft picks. And frankly, I was disappointed in what both of them came to the table with. Now, the whole O-line, they struggled with twists that Idaho ran. They struggled with picking up backers. I felt like there were times where they even lost one-on-one matchups, and that just can't happen against an FCS opponent. You are an FBS team. You're a top 5 team in the country right now, at least based on the preseason rankings, and you certainly didn't look at it. You didn't look at it in the trenches, and that, I think, is why you didn't have those big explosive plays, and I think that's why you had a lot of drives that stalled out and didn't end up in points.
Hand up, I didn't play the game of football, so I don't know what I'm talking about in the X's and O's sense, but I read over and over again this offseason, I was told over and over again that this Oregon squad has the dudes, that they loaded up on them, whether it be the transfer portal, recent recruiting classes, that they have now at every position group the depth and the quality to be one of these national title contending teams. And I still believe that might be the case.
100%.
But having heard that all offseason, and I had an expectation today that it was going to look a little bit more like a David and Goliath matchup, that it was going to look a little bit more like the bully ball we've been told to expect. And other than maybe the first offensive possession for Idaho, it didn't look like bully ball. It looked like Oregon, a team who couldn't quite get into rhythm, having trouble with a feisty, plucky team that was frankly going toe-to-toe with them.
Well, and it was a lot of stupid mistakes that Coach Lanning's teams haven't made. We were talking about it before the show started, Buck. We've been doing this now for 3 years. In my 3 years of doing this show with you, I can't remember a time until today where I felt like Coach Lanning's squad didn't show up. Like when they lost to Georgia, they got the break speed off them, but that Georgia team was that much better than they were. It was never a question of like, well, did Coach Lanning get his guys ready to go? And it frankly, they didn't feel like they were ready to go. I remember early on in the second quarter, Connerly, he had 2 penalties for being lined up in the backfield.
Yeah.
As an offensive lineman, that cannot happen. I've played the position, albeit not as highly as they did, but I'll tell you right now, it's not that hard to have your head in your center's hip. And I think largely what Oregon was missing in this game, and this isn't to bag on anybody, this is more so to point out the fact of how blessed you've been at that center position. The first year that we did this, you had Alex Forsythe.
Mm-hmm.
He was a senior. He was a leader. He ended up being an NFL draft pick. He'd been in the system for a while, and I know it wasn't Dillingham's system, but he had been a Duck, and he knew what it meant to be a Duck, and he was a leader, and he was able to get his guys in the right spots. And last year, you had the best center in college football in Jackson Powers Johnson. I remember going into that offseason, it was, well, he's a great guard. Can we get him to play center? And all of a sudden, he turned into the best center in football and is now going to play and make a lot of money on Sundays. And frankly, this offensive line right now just doesn't have that center. That doesn't mean that they won't get there. Sometimes it takes a game or 2 or 4 or 5 to get ready to go, right? And the nice thing for you is you don't really have a true test until October 12th.
Already starting to look like a blessing, isn't it?
You do have some wiggle room. And you also have to remember, too, like, Dylan Gabriel's going to figure out things. Evan Stewart's going to figure out things.
Yeah.
That defensive secondary is going to get more shored up, and they really weren't an issue in this game. But when you have all these transfers, we've seen it takes 2, 3, 4 weeks, games. Sometimes it even takes a couple months. Jordan Birch didn't come on until late last year.
Yeah.
And it felt in this game he picked up where he left off last year. So while I do think there's a lot of Oregon fans that want to look at it and it's like, oh my God, the sky is falling. Our offensive line is horrible. We have no explosive plays. Our running backs keep falling down because the turf monster in Eugene keeps grabbing them. And in reality, it's take a deep breath. The O-line has a lot of things they need to improve on, specifically both of your tackles. They're supposed to be your big-time playmakers. They can't make the stupid mistakes that they made. They can't get beat one-on-one in matchups that they got beat on. You gave up 3 sacks. That can't happen. Whoever your center is going to be, he needs to be more vocal. He needs to get everyone on the same page so that there aren't linebackers running free. And then just understand that it's going to take a little bit of time for everyone to gel. Yep. But once they do, watch out because you still have the dudes.
So I guess I'm wondering where that leaves us, because we'll certainly find some positives in this, but I have always believed this team to be pretty disciplined and pretty buttoned up, and frankly have a coaching staff that won't allow really much else. And while some guys made some strides individually, it just kind of collectively felt meh. And I don't know if it's because you're playing in the afternoon heat. I don't know if it's because you've been reading all of your press clippings and hearing all the headlines all summer, but what's the mentality going into an opener, especially an opener where you're favored so heavily? Is it possible that they just weren't locked in?
Yeah, I think that's totally possible. I think it's possible that it hasn't been this hot this whole summer. It's been a pretty cool summer, and then all of a sudden it's super hot, and you kind of let it get to you a little bit. These are all things that are possible. But if you're an Oregon Ducks team that's supposed to be the 3rd team in the country, that's not an excuse. And you can't have this excuse, and Coach Lanning's not going to allow them to have this excuse. They are going to get better. It's going to take time for them to gel. Like I said, you have a bunch of transfers in. They have to learn how to play together. There are things that I would be worried about right now. I am worried about how the offensive line looks as a cohesive unit. I would be a little bit worried about buttoning certain things up. I think that Coach Lanning will do that. He's shown that he can do that, and he has done that in the past. The sky is not falling. That being said, if you have another scare next week against Boise State or against Oregon State, or these things don't get fixed and they don't get fixed fast, you're not going to beat Ohio State on October 12th.
No. In fact, I wonder if the look-ahead line is shifting at all today after tonight.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I know that
it has to.
Listen, with all of the attention and the Oregon has arrived banners that have been waved this offseason, the national media, at least in the Twitter sphere, has been very vocal tonight about Oregon not looking up to the part, or looking the part that they've been billed. Schultze, you've got some thoughts on this game. What was your general reaction to it? I know that this is the kind of thing that really chaps you when it seems like the better team just isn't taking care of business. What did you see out there?
Yeah, this is definitely the thing that chaps my ass as a Duck fan. It wasn't an 81-6 or 7 beatdown like we had against Portland State in last year's season opener.
No.
I feel like a lot of Duck fans were expecting that. I get it. You don't
I
pay.
kind of was.
Yeah, you don't pay somebody to come in basically for a practice to then literally almost get beat by them. And you're talking about multiple All-Americans on the offensive line that had a very disappointing performance today. I'm scared. I'm not trying to just go off the cliff here, but I'm scared that Oregon isn't going to be able to compete like I thought they would against Boise State next week. I'm not even considering Ohio State yet. I'm worried because Oregon is so bad historically against Boise State that they're not even going to be able to compete. And for Boise State, I would assume it's kind of like their Super Bowl, their championship this year. They love to knock guys off. So I love the performance from Dillon Gabriel. Everybody, minus, of course, the fumble. I don't think the sacks were quite his fault. Everybody on Twitter saying, oh, Gabriel, not the quarterback I thought he was. He threw for almost 400 yards. Love that, but the offensive line scared me, and I'm a little concerned about those guys up front.
All right, Schultz, you bring up Dillon Gabriel's numbers, and it's at this point in time I would like to bring up our Ducks Game Day secret score.
Ducks Game Day secret score.
Now, this surprised me a little bit because there was a lot of sky is falling. There were some naysayers about Gabriel. He doesn't look like he's on the money. Mm-hmm. He's been off a couple here or there. Care to guess what his completion percentage was tonight, Will?
I have it in front of me. I'm cheating, but tell what the completion percentage is, and then I'll give my take because I kind of see where they're coming from.
Both things can be true.
They're coming from.
Dillon Gabriel was 41 of 49 tonight for a completion percentage of 83.7%. That is your secret score, 83.7. You don't need the percent, but 83.7. Remember that secret score. Listen to the 7 a.m. hour of Monday's Dirt and Sprague and listen for your cue to text in. If you win or get that number, you could win the $100 gift card to Laurelhurst Market. Your secret score is 83.7. Go ahead, Will.
It felt very similar from Gabe Dillon, like Cam Ward last year. When Cam Ward was at WSU and he came into Autzen, he threw for over 400 yards passing.
Yeah.
He had I don't remember, it obviously was an 84% completion percentage, but it was above 50. I don't know if it was quite in the 60s. And if you looked at his stats, you'd go, wow, he threw for a lot of yards. Now he only threw for 1 touchdown, so that must mean that WSU ran the ball for a lot of touchdowns. And then you look at the score, and Oregon blew WSU completely out of the water. And so it felt like in this game that there were a lot of Dillon Gabriel passes where it was just, let's get a bunch of yards, and he found ways to get a bunch of yards. And it wasn't always his fault why drives got stalled. I mean, when your offensive line gives up 2 sacks to one guy, I mean, that's a problem. When your offensive line keeps jumping off sides, or you get holding penalties, or you have these mistakes that just you're not used to seeing from an Oregon offensive line, that can kind of kill some of your drives, and that's why Gabriel didn't have as many touchdowns as you might want. But it really felt like from the 20 to the 20, he was money.
Yeah.
And then he didn't finish in the red zone. And the one thing that Bo Nix, even when we had, early on where Bo Nix, he didn't struggle, but he wasn't Bo Nix of last year where he's a Heisman candidate.
Sure.
He always finished in the red zone. And
Yep.
Gabriel didn't do that. And that's always going to leave a sour taste in fans' mouths because they are going to remember the last thing that you did. And the last thing that you did is not get into the end zone.
Yeah, I think we also have to remember that this is as good a quarterback that even though he was a Heisman candidate with Oklahoma, even though he lit it up for Central Florida, this is still a quarterback who's new to this program, who's working with a new offensive coordinator, who's working with a new center,
Right.
who's working with new receivers. You have O-linemen who are new working together. You have, for all those receivers, it's a different guy throwing them the ball last year, different timing. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt that it is hard to have this many new pieces and all be on the same page right now. But I also expected there to be just a little bit more air of dominance today that I didn't quite see there.
It should have been. And look, it's a better Idaho team than Portland State. You can't compare this Idaho team to Portland State.
And I do want to give Idaho credit. Those kids played their butts off. They were really good.
They are a playoff team in FCS. They will be a playoff team again this year. They are a good team. You still should have put up 50,
Agreed.
And they should have put up 14 or 7.
And
you should have blown them out 100%.
Can I quickly add, this is probably Jack Lane's Super Bowl, too. Lake Oswego kid coming back. I bet he had a chip on his shoulder. I don't know if Oregon even called him or not. Probably not. So there's a reason that he balled out of his booty, or at least was ready with a flea flicker. But no, you should have scored 50. I agree.
You look at the stats, they're very misleading. If you go down the list, Gabriel has 380, Lane has 168. Gabriel's 84% completion, Lane is 44. When it comes to rushing, you have 107 yards on the ground. Most of it is by Jordan James. Idaho has 49. Most of it is by Cummings. They don't have a receiver over 57. You've got 2 guys in the 80s. And at the same time, you were basically 17-14 with 5 minutes left.
Yeah.
It's not finishing, and it's not doing the little things. I think the little things get fixed, and I think they get fixed fast.
I would agree.
That's what Lanning has always held his hat on, and you could tell just by looking at him on the sideline that he was upset. So if you're an Oregon Duck fan and you think the sky is falling, I think you're wrong. But I definitely see why you're worried, and you should be worried, and it's because you're a fan and you're fanatical, and right now you have one test where you can judge everything on, and you didn't get an A in that test. You got a C, maybe even a D.
Well, you know that there's a lot of anticipation when the text line is firing up. The Vancouver Ford text line, there's a lot of thoughts coming in from you, the Duck fans, on the drive home. Want to have you guys be a part of the conversation. So text us on the Vancouver Ford text line, 503-8646-FAN. That's 503-864-6326. We're also on the YouTubes this year, so check us out on YouTube at 1080 The Fan. We'll be streaming this show as well as the pregame show. Lots of extra Ducks coverage for you. Let us know your thoughts on the game, the good, the bad, the ugly, what have you. We will be getting into all of it today. But coming up next, going to talk to our friend Anthony Newman. He's on the pregame show. He was also at the game today with his high school kids, but I want to get his opinion on the secondary, who was tested early and often in this one. We'll talk to Anthony coming up next, but first, let's toss it over to Schultze with a traffic and weather update brought to you by Victorino's Mexican Food. Order Victorino's for your game day celebration in-store or online for pickup or delivery at victoricos.com. Here's Schultze.
Appreciate that, Buck. Looking at a fairly clear drive on your way up from Autzen Stadium. A tiny bit of slowing through Albany. One smoky as well, I-5 northbound through Salem, kind of past the Lancaster exit there. But other than that, free and clear on your way up to Portland and beyond. 80 degrees in Portland. The Ducks postgame forecast calling for a low of 62. Tomorrow, sunny and 87. 80 degrees in Eugene next Saturday when the Ducks host Boise State.
Dusty here for Victorino's Mexican Food to tell you about one of their new
1080 The Fan. Pacific Office Automation. Problem solved.
That groan there from Jerry might need to be clipped into a drop.
Hilarious.
That's basically, I feel like that is a microcosm of today's game and everyone's sentiment behind it. Ryan Buckley, Will Ortner, Jordan Schultz here with you on the Pacific Office Automation Postgame Scoreboard Show. And joining us now, a friend of ours from Ducks Roundtable, the Ducks pregame show, and he was down at Autzen today, a former Duck himself, Anthony Newman. Anthony, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing real good. We got a win. Feeling good. That was ugly, but it's a win. Move on. Move on.
Well, let me ask you this first. We'll start with what I imagine is the good stuff. You were down there at the game with your team today, were you not? Your high school team?
Yes, my high school team was at the game.
So tell me about that experience. They got to see some of their former teammates out there playing on the field, and you had the whole squad out.
It was a great experience for the kids. We brought about 80 kids and maybe about 9 coaches, and they had a blast. And there was there was 3 guys who are playing in Idaho that played at Westland, and one guy who played a lot, Mark Hamper, who was a stud, and he played well in this game. And there was a couple of guys that didn't travel. So, it's nice to see what your own kids who you deal with in high school playing at the college level. And then we have a kicker as well that played for the Ducks. So, It was pretty cool. The kids, they enjoyed it. I mean, they were having fun and they were eating a lot. I think they gained a few pounds. Every time I turned around, they had food in their hands. So it was pretty cool. So
well, let's talk a little bit about the pigskin action. For one, you're a safety, former defensive back, and we have a lot of new parts in the Oregon secondary this year. We saw a couple of them stand out today. The first being Brandon Johnson, who had the interception in the end zone. Pretty impressive and acrobatic, but just overall, before we get to individuals, your evaluation of the performance today from a lot of new guys playing together, because they got tested early and often, and from my point of view, it looked like they did pretty well, but want to know your perspective as a DB.
Well, as a secondary, they played a lot of man defense. You saw the guys up in the receiver's face, press coverage, and they ran well with them. You got dudes who can play. You got guys who are athletes. They know how to play man-to-man, and then you need pressure on the quarterback, and they got that as well. But also, you need guys who, when they're playing defensive back, they don't panic on the deep balls. And there was a few deep balls thrown. Idaho wanted to go deep. As a matter of fact, a couple of them were to Mark Hamper, our own Westland kid. But the DBs played well. They played well. They didn't panic, and they tackled well. That's another thing. People forget about DBs just covering. You got to tackle too, and no yards after contact. And they did a good job with that.
Anthony, what'd you notice with the D-line? It seems like they were getting after the quarterback a couple of different times from a couple of different players. How does that help the secondary, and who was standing out to you?
Well, Jordan Birch. I mean, who else? I mean, the man-child, the Tarzan. Every time you turned around, he was in the backfield. He's a big man. I was looking at him on the sideline. It's just, I can't get over how big he is. He's gigantic, but he moves like a DB. He really does. He looks like a DB. He has a DB body, but he's lean. He's not some big heavy guy, and that helps the secondary. If you can put pressure on the quarterback, you can speed up the process of the quarterback throwing the ball when he doesn't want to throw the ball, and you have DBs. We talk about interceptions. They happen because of tips and overthrows, and that's, the quarterback's getting rushed to throw the football. He's off balance, and it sails on him. And then next thing you know, it's an interception. So it starts up front. You can't win football games if you don't have dudes up front on offense or defense. And so the defensive line, they played well. This game, it's hard to judge, but it wasn't the best game that they played. I think, and I told my fellow coaches, I think this Oregon team was beat up from training camp. I think they were tired because Oregon had a very physical training camp. So I think it took a toll during this game. And yes, it was hot, and that both teams they have to deal with the heat. But I think Oregon was a little tired.
Yeah, it definitely. I don't know whether it's the combination of the heat and the training camp, but something. I told Will early in this show that it felt like there wasn't that bully ball element that you might have expected our roster versus theirs. It felt like it should have been a little bit more one-sided. It felt like it should have looked a little bit more one-sided. But there are also plenty of mental mistakes too, pre-snap issues, penalties,
Yeah.
things like that. You're a coach. What do you tell your team after a game like this? Because obviously you got your win, but there's a lot that you want to clean up. What's your message in the locker room like tonight?
Well, if I'm talking to the whole team, you always have to talk about you have to get better. You have to improve every game, and you have to find out the mistakes that you made and understand about those mistakes and know how to correct those mistakes and not make the same mistake again. There's a lot of competition on this football team. There's a lot of guys who want to play. They're fighting for first string, and they're fighting for playing time. So you want to have that competition during practice, but you also have to be a smart football player. You have to have a high football IQ, and you learn a lot when you make mistakes during a game because you can understand, oh, this is the situation, this would happen. Okay, now I know I can't make that mistake again. So you want the guys who are making those mistakes to grow and get better, but also it's a learning situation for the guys who are standing on the sideline and go, okay, yeah, he did this, I can't do that next time. So you're going to learn from these games, and they're early. And I think the biggest thing is no injuries.
Right.
That I'm aware of. I don't think anybody really got hurt.
It didn't seem like it. There was a moment where everyone held their breath because Gabriel hit his hand on somebody's helmet, but it seems like they got out largely unscathed. I'm sure we'll hear more from Lanning in the next day or two.
Yeah, that scared me. I saw that.
Anthony, I was watching the Oregon offensive line struggle. And I'm watching it.
I wanted to ask you about this. I want to ask you questions about this, but go ahead.
That's fair. And you can ask me as many questions as you want. And so I've given my opinion on why I think the Oregon offensive line struggled and where they need to fix certain things. But what did you see from Idaho and specifically their D-line and their defensive schemes that they were running that confused the Ducks? And how did the Ducks go and fix that?
Well, first of all, I saw an Idaho defense that was fast as a team.
Yes.
They ran to the football. We call it RP, right, guys? RP. My coaches are in the car with me. We call it RP, relentless pursuit to the football. That's what I saw from Idaho. I saw 8 guys around the ball. Every time there was a running back running the football for Oregon or they're throwing hitches, I saw a lot of white jerseys coming to the football. So that's the number one thing that I saw. And then there was a lot of slanting with the defensive linemen, slant right, slant left. And that creates problems as well because as an offensive lineman, Will, you know this, you're trying to figure out where this guy's going. Is he going to go to the right? Is he going to go to the left? It makes you think. And when you start thinking on the football field, you slow up. And so you don't play fast. So Idaho looked like they were playing fast. Oregon looked like they were in slow motion. That's what I saw. That's why I looked when I was watching the offense for Oregon. Yes, they're missing some offensive linemen. A couple of guys are hurt. But as a whole, everything looked slow. And for Idaho, they were just playing lights out. Like they didn't care. Like just let's go run. Let's go blitz. Let's get after it. Let's play man-to-man on the receivers. Let's have some fun.
There's definitely an element with that Idaho team that was pretty carefree with the way that they played, and it showed. Oregon maybe looked either a little tight, a little sloppy, a little bit off, but hopefully is something that Dan Lanning and company can get cleaned up in the next week. One more question for you, Anthony. I mentioned at the beginning of this interview just all the new faces, Brandon Johnson, Kobe Savage, Jabbar Muhammad. Watching those guys today, what were the first impressions that you got from some of the new guys in the secondary?
Well, they understand the defense. We talk about communication, and when you talk about the secondary, it starts with communication. It starts with, okay, we're playing man coverage, and a guy has to go in motion. Okay, well now do I bump or do I travel? And you have to have those communications. You have to have those talks before the ball's even snapped. You got to gather information before the ball snapped. I saw that young secondary. I don't want to say young secondary, the new secondary. But they're experienced guys. Savage, he's played a couple of years at Kansas State. They understand the game, but also they know that they're in a new situation, new environment, a lot of new DBs around them. But they understood if we talk and communicate, we can play as one, and that's what they did.
That is former Ducks legend Anthony Newman, former NFL star as well. Anthony, no Ducks Roundtable this week because of Labor Day, so you have a great week, and we will talk to you Saturday for the pregame show against Boise State.
Sounds good. I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
All right, take care.
See ya.
That is Anthony Newman. He's with us every pregame, every postgame, and every Monday, except for this upcoming one where we are off, not laboring on Labor Day. I want to get into a few more of the things that Anthony talked about with Will. I want to switch over to the defensive side of the ball, the good, the bad, the ugly. I think there was, frankly, a lot to like. I had more issues or concerns with what I saw on the offensive side of the ball today.
Same.
So hopefully we can pick some highlights there and talk a little bit about some of those new faces who I think impressed on the back end of the defense. You are listening to the Pacific Office Automation post-game scoreboard show. Now it's time to toss it back over to Schulte for the Victoricos traffic and weather. Order Victoricos for your game day celebration in store or online for pickup or delivery at victoricos.com.
Thanks, Buck. Taking a look at some slowing through Albany, and then once again, about another 5 minutes or so up north of Albany, getting towards Salem around the Jefferson area. There is a report of a smoky in Albany as well, I-5 northbound, but once you get past Salem, fairly clear and speed limit drive on your way up to Portland from Autzen Stadium. Right now, 80 in Portland. The Ducks postgame forecast calls for a low of 62. Tomorrow, 87 and 80 degrees in Eugene next Saturday when the Ducks host Boise State.
Window Nation customers have been singing our praises for years with
down the left side, coming back for it. Oh, no. Did he catch it? Incomplete. Or was it intercepted? Picked off. I did not see that on the far side. Holy cow. Tysheen Johnson Brandon Johnson, I beg your pardon.
Highlights, scores, and more. This is the Pacific Office Automation Postgame Scoreboard Show on the Odyssey app and Portland's sports leader, 1080 The Fan. Pacific Office Automation. Problem solved.
Welcome back to the Pacific Office Automation Postgame Scoreboard Show. My co-host here, Will Ortner, is saying the voiceover parts from our rejoiner here as they come, and tell you what, he knows his Pacific Office Automation.
They're my favorite automation.
Well, he knows it better than me because I would always cut it off on the liner before it would say it. So good job. You're better than me at this.
Hey, look, Pacific Automation and we go way back.
What's the tag? Problem solved?
Problem solved.
Yeah, Will's all over that.
I love Pacific Automation. Not entirely sure what they do, but they're fantastic.
We'll have an answer for you by the end of the show.
I'm going to Google it.
Want to talk about the defensive side of the ball for the Oregon Ducks today, because if we had to split everything up, defense, offense, even special teams, I think you have to say the defense was the strong point for Oregon today. They only allow 14 points. In some cases, they were put in a tough position defensively, but overall, what did you see? Would you call it a successful performance? Obviously, it's tough because of the opponent you're playing. Again, not always dominant, but overall pretty good.
I was really happy with the defense, specifically the defensive line. And the two guys that I'm going to shout out, because I know that Anthony came in and he talked about Jordan Birch, who was everywhere. The two guys to me that had a big game, Derek Harmon, you go out in the transfer portal, you have to get a new 3-tech because you lost Brandon Dorless. That dude was everywhere. He had 5 total tackles. He had 1.5 sacks. He had 2 TFLs. He forced a fumble. He was all over the field causing havoc for Idaho. And when it comes to stopping an offense, if you have an interior defensive lineman that can get after the quarterback but can also stop the run, that's going to entirely change your game plan and what you can do as an offense. That is huge. He came in billed as a game wrecker, and that's exactly what Derek Harmon was in the first game. The second guy that I have to shout out, Matui Uiagalelei. Oh my God. He is living up to the hype. The move that he pulled to get the second pass.
Yeah, I need to cut you off here because I want to tell the listeners exactly how this went down.
Wow.
This was obviously we're sitting here in the studio watching the fourth quarter of the game, and Will's got his feet kicked up on the desk, and Mateo Uiagalelei comes around the corner for the sack, and me, I'm like, oh, nice, a sack, and Will sits up in his seat and he's like, oh my God, he hit him with the Donald. He dropped the Donald on him. So tell me exactly what you saw there that was so impressive.
It's an unbelievable move because so few can do it because of how risky it is. So Aaron Donald really popularized it. And what he does is, as soon as the ball is snapped, he takes an inside step to get the offensive lineman to commit to the inside. He then jumps in the air, which you are told never to do. As a defensive lineman, he jumps in the air and takes his hands and double swats the offensive lineman's hands away. So that way, as soon as he lands, he's already past the offensive lineman, and it's a free run right to the quarterback. And to have someone at the age of 19 years old who's able to do that to the point where he makes the offensive lineman turn around and look stupid. The poor Idaho offensive lineman that was blocking him just turned with his hands up and was like, I don't know what to do there. I just got sunned.
Yeah.
It's a great move. And to have that kid in that position who you are kind of grooming him to be that opposite, right? He needs to be the opposite of Jordan Birch. Jordan Birch is going to be the D end on the strong side. You need that weak side defensive end. And right now, what I saw from Matui Uiagalelei was all that and more than what you could have asked for him. He had 2 sacks. I know he only had 3 total tackles, but when you're in the backfield, you cause a fumble, you have multiple QB hits to go along with your sacks, and you have multiple TFLs. That means you're playing on the offensive side of the football. And again, he's 19. He's only going to get better. The only critique that I have, he needs to find bigger shoulder pads. It looks like he's running around like a rugby player out there. Other than that, I felt like that kid had a perfect opener to the season.
And then additionally, one other guy that jumped out to both you and I, but will not jump out from the box score tonight.
Right.
Tatum Tuioti.
Yes.
We saw him featured a little bit in, I was going to say Ducks versus them, but that team out west.
Right.
He seems like a guy that, I don't know if other Duck fans are going to remember these guys, but recently like a Jordan Scott who helped plug the middle, or even a little further back a Jeremy Gibbs. That was like a guy who was like when I was in school, but they have not had, it doesn't feel like that kind of beef in the middle, making plays for others. And maybe you can explain that a little bit, because I just saw a guy that was almost dominant tonight, but it doesn't look like it from his box score.
Right. So the play that's always going to stand out to me for Tuioti is the Jordan Birch sack. And on the Big Ten Network, they rightfully loved up Jordan Birch. Jordan Birch made a great play. He pushes his right tackle into the backfield. He then shucks off of him, and he's there to make the play on the quarterback. But the reason that the quarterback was all the way on Jordan's side is because Tuioti just bull rushed the tackle he was going up against, got underneath his pads, lifted him up, put him on skates. Then after he threw him to the ground, I think he left a cleat mark on his shoulder pads as he ran him over to get to the quarterback. And the only reason he didn't get a sack is because the quarterback ran right into Jordan Birch. It's plays like that, though, that you have to have on this defense. This defense is built for guys to be flying around and to be unselfish. So there are going to be weeks where Tuioti, he has one tackle like this, but he creates a bunch of plays for others. It's going to come back around for him. And it might be next week where you look at the box score and you go, well, where was Derek Harmon? That dude didn't, he has one tackle. He didn't really do anything. And then you watch the game film and you're like, oh, that's because Uiagalelei and Tuioti and Jordan Birch, they stole all the tackles and the sacks that he caused.
Now let's move just level back on the defense to the linebacking unit. I felt like they were solid today, but and I know that's like a super generic term, but it felt like at times they could have been better than they were. But overall, they didn't get gashed too much. What was your evaluation about what the middle level of defense did?
I thought they did well. I mean, Betcher went out and had a performance. He leads your team in tackles. He had 5 as well, 2 solos. I think that the way that this defense is going to work is you are going to have a week in, week out new tackles leader. You're not going to look at this defense and go, oh, Noah Sewell had 12 tackles again, and then he's going to have 12 again and again. And so I think this week it just felt like the defensive line won more one-on-one battles, and so they're able to get into the backfield. So they're the ones making all the big plays.
Sure.
And you're not going to see Betcher, you're not going to see Bossa as much this week. Now, next week when you play Boise State, you're going to have to wrangle in a running back that has some wiggle to him now. And so I think you might see more tackles from your linebackers in those spots.
And then finally, the secondary, I was pretty impressed with them. I know that, that they, frankly, I saw more names popping up of guys that I wasn't expecting. Like Jamar Muhammad certainly, but I didn't think Brandon Johnson was a guy that got talked up a lot during camp at all. He's another one of those transfers. He comes over from Duke, and he had a great game.
Fantastic.
First of all, the interception that he made that we heard on the play-by-play cut, that was Idaho driving to make it a 7-7 ball game, and he turned around, ball in air, and was able to just get a hand on it enough to tip it up to himself and give himself time to get to secure the ball and get a foot in bounds. I think he got both feet in bounds, but I heard virtually nothing about this cat, and he makes maybe the play of the game. And then again, he has another one on the other side of the field, deep ball coverage, a little bit of hand fighting. You could have said that maybe he got away with a little bit, but again, makes the play. And a guy that I didn't necessarily expect contributions from right away, doing that right away.
Yeah, the guy that I was looking for to make the big plays was Jabbar Muhammad. So to me, when you have Nico Reed and then you have Jordan going out there, Johnson.
Brandon Johnson.
Thank you. When those are the guys that are going out and making the interceptions, they're the ones getting the turnovers. That's got to make you feel good because you know you still have that lockdown corner. I don't have to worry about Jabbar Muhammad. I just thought going into the year, you might need a little bit more production out of him because the other guys hadn't gelled yet together and they hadn't had the opportunity to play in these types of games that he obviously has. So when you have these two guys go out and they're the ones making the turnovers, they're making big plays, they're not getting beat deep, right? Aside from a broken play, Idaho didn't do much offensively. This isn't, when you come out of this game, a lot of people are going to say, well, Oregon sucked. No, they didn't.
Well, and when you look at Oregon,
parts of Oregon
only winning by 10, it's not because the defense played poorly.
No. Exactly. So you need to look at this as two separate spots. And defensively, I thought you did everything that I could have asked of you. The only thing that you didn't do was have a pick six or a fumble recovery for a touchdown. That's the only knock against you. And you have one broken play where they ran a trick play and they got you. Aside from that, I was really impressed with what this defense brought.
And can I quickly add to the secondary? Nice to see. I believe it was like episode 3 or 4 of that team out west where Dan Lanning was talking about how young cornerbacks, young defensive backs can be implemented into a very successful defensive scheme if they're coached. And it was nice to see, I think, like a sophomore, Devin Jackson, only had a tackle last year, actually get in significant playing time. Tyler Turner as well. He's a freshman that just came in this year, but a very high recruit. So I know, like, yeah, the offense wasn't so great, but at least seeing like the defense maybe ready, to take that next step and to be that elite Big Ten SEC-like defense. I feel like I did see the footprints for that today.
Yeah, I felt like we certainly saw the depth of the secondary today. I think we saw the depth of the linebacking core and the D-line as well. I think that you have enough depth there that you can sustain just the rigors of the season and avoid some of the burnout that can happen to a thin defense. I think that they have the dudes they need, and frankly, today I thought that looked pretty good. Mm-hmm. Coming up on the other side of this break, we're going to talk to a man who was on the sidelines for this game. Dusty Hara had the Toyota Sideline mic down there for the Ducks broadcast that you heard right here on 1080 The Fan, and we'll pick his brain about what he saw from the field. That's coming up next, but first, we'll toss it over to Schultze, who has traffic and weather, brought to you by Victor Rico's Mexican Food. Order for your game day celebration in-store or online for pickup or delivery at victorricos.com. Here's Schultz.
Appreciate it, Buck. Still looking at slowing through Albany, maybe adding an extra 10 minutes or so to your drive on I-5 northbound. There is a report of a smoky a few miles before you get to Albany on I-5 north, but once you get out of there, beware right around Enchanted Forest in Salem, some slowing as well. And then, past that point, free and clear up to downtown Portland. And looking at the temperature, 79 right now in Portland, getting cooler. The Ducks postgame forecast calls for a low of 62. Tomorrow, sunny and 87, 80 degrees in Eugene next Saturday when the Ducks host Boise State.
Your home for Oregon Ducks football is KFXX KWJJ HD2 Portland.
Touchdown, Bo Nix.
1080 The Fan, an Odyssey station. We're back with a complete recap of today's game.
And Gabriel will have James behind him. In fact, the fullback in front of him. Give it to James, and he will stroll to the right side and a touchdown. I formation, old school, run the ball. How about that? Up under center.
With the coaches and players you want to hear. Your feedback on the contest. Scores and highlights from across the country. Ducks postgame traffic reports. And analysis from your game day crew. This is the Ducks postgame scoreboard show on 1080 The Fan. Oregon Ducks football on 1080 The Fan is brought to you by Coors Light, Pacific Office Automation, Mods PDX, Victor Rico's Mexican Food, Legends Casino Hotel in Toppenish, by Zoom Care, Bellagio's Pizza, Multnomah County Behavioral Health Division, Audi Wilsonville, Laurelhurst Market, and by Langdon Farms Golf Club. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Buckley and Will Ortner. The Ducks postgame scoreboard show on 1080 The Fan.
Welcome back to the Pacific Office Automation post-game scoreboard show as we roll on following a Ducks 24-14 victory, the number 3 team in the land. Take care of business against Idaho. They finished the day 1-0, which is the big goal there. But as Will Ortner often says, it should look a certain way, and today it didn't. Someone who had a closer look at that was Dusty Hara, who was on the sideline with the Toyota Sideline mic. How did things look to you just from the naked eye, Dusty, from the field level today? Because from all of us up here in the Portland area watching on television, something just didn't seem quite right with the Ducks. Maybe there just wasn't enough juice. Maybe there was some fatigue. What did it look like to you?
Yeah, it was interesting because, first of all, give Idaho a ton of credit.
Agreed.
Because their defensive line played out of their mind. And Afalava is really stinking good. Number 5 was it Williams, Malachi Williams. Absolutely a force on the inside. But in sure tackling by their linebackers, coach's kid, Jackson Eck, was all over the field playing sideline to sideline. And they were sure tackling. In the secondary, their plan was really sound. And I think a lot of teams are going to try to do this against Oregon, but it's really difficult to do, and give them credit because they did a phenomenal job, which is cap the safeties, don't get beat deep, keep everything in front of you, and rally to it. You got to be sure tackling. You got to be really disciplined. They did a really good job of that. But I think the greater sense when you watched it was Oregon's lack of explosive plays was apparent.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that they've thrived on as an offense. It's something that Will Stein absolutely loves, and he says is a base of their offense is explosive plays, and they just weren't popping. I can't tell you how many runs there were from Jordan James or Noah Whittington where it was like that one guy just nips him on the heels, and there were running lanes, but he got clipped on the heel, and I think a lot of that was because there was a wash in the middle of the offensive line, and that was kind of the question going in was who was going to play center, what was the guard spots going to look like. You felt really comfortable at the tackle positions, but even as Johnny Cornelius got beat on the edge a time or two, it did look like they were just, I don't know, playing with like their feet in sand for a little bit. And that's not to say that we haven't seen this before. I remember a really hot day in Lubbock, Texas last year, where we had a lot of the same concerns about the offensive line, and it was like 95 degrees. It was hot, and the offensive line, I think people walked away from that game with a lot of question marks about how they were going to play, and they rallied. But I think the bigger question mark is, last year it was Bo Nix in year 2 who had a mastery of the offense and what they were doing and the weapons and how to use them. You had Jackson Powers Johnson, who slid into that center position, and there were big shoes to fill after Alex Forsythe left. And he filled them as the best center in all of college football. That is the brains of your offensive line and a quarterback that can get you into good situations when you get a bad look pre-snap defensively. And I think with time, it'll get better, but I think that maybe we do take for granted how good Bo Nix and Jackson Powers Johnson were at getting Oregon in the right spot for those explosive plays.
Dusty, how do they go about it this week on getting guys in the right spot? Obviously, the O-line has had a couple injuries, so maybe get certain guys back. Maybe that makes a change. And then also, what were you hearing on the sideline from the offensive line and from their coach? How are they going about trying to fix some of the mistakes that they were seeing in real time?
Yeah, that's a great question on in real time and kind of how they're interacting and how they were trying to fix things. And you can't get a good read. They're so locked in now. They have a new bench system that has like a covered awning, so you can't get a good look at anything when you're walking by and behind. It wasn't like they were hanging their heads. It was a problem solving situation there. I think physically you look at them and you say, yeah, this is it. They've got the bodies up front, but they are dinged up. We didn't see Matthew Bedford, the Indiana transfer, who, he was seen in a brace a couple of weeks ago on his knee. I will say he was suited up today, so we didn't see him. There were a couple other guys that we thought we might see, but the rotation wasn't as deep as what we have accustomed to seeing and what we're used to seeing. And I think that maybe they do have a couple nicks and bruises. Again, we don't know because they don't really release much about the injuries. We got like the availability report before the game, but I mean, when you just say a lot of guys are questionable, we have no idea what that means.
Yeah.
As far as where the fixes go for next week, I mean, look, you just got to, what it's like being an offensive lineman. It takes time and continuity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they got a punch from Idaho that I don't think they were expecting. I don't think they were expecting the depth that Idaho brought on the defensive line. Coach Jason Eck was talking all week about how they were going to travel 10 defensive linemen, and their plan was to play them. Mm-hmm. And they rotated in a lot of guys on that defensive line for Idaho. And look, you get a ton of credit goes to them, but I think that now you've seen it live. You've seen with Pickard at center, Poncho at right guard, Marcus Harper at left guard. It'll be interesting to see how that rotation changes, if it does change, and what bodies are available to kind of mix in as we move forward. But I think there are a lot of questions about that moving forward.
Dusty, today was the first time for a lot of people to familiarize themselves with some of the new faces on the roster out at Autzen Stadium, and maybe for yourself as well. I know you've seen a lot of these guys play at the schools they came from, but which of the new Ducks made the biggest impressions on you today?
Brandon Johnson, the corner from Duke, he had that interception, which was an incredible interception.
I think that was the play of the game.
To put his body in that position, that was an outstanding play that he made, and then he made another one downfield too. And I think he really popped. Dylan Gabriel too. I mean, guys, 41 to 48 for 380 yards, and like I can count a couple of drops. I mean, the one that sticks out to me the most was Jordan James on a third down, short third down, and it went right off his hands early in the game, where you keep that drive alive, and maybe you're cooking with gasoline there, because that would have been a big change for you. Keeping that drive alive, and then that was at that point, I think you were up 14-0. 21 probably feels a lot different in that regard. Dylan Gabriel was lights out. Evan Stewart was kind of quiet, but he was open a lot. I mean, and that was one of the things that was kind of jarring, is that the plays were there to be made, right? And they were open if Dylan Gabriel has enough time. He went 41 to 48 for 380, but I think that when they go back and they watch that film, the pressure was there where he had to take the quick one, right? He was having to check down to Tez on the short little spot routes, or Terrence Ferguson as his safety valve, where the deep shots that they were scheming Evan Stewart open on, they were there. It just took too long because there wasn't enough time. That's a concern, but it's also one of those silver linings where if you fix the protection, if you can get that offensive line playing with more chemistry and continuity up front and handing guys off and picking up blitz better, I think that those big plays are there. But Dylan Gabriel was outstanding today. And then Jamari Caldwell, early in the game, look, we sit there and we're looking at this game like Oregon just couldn't separate. Idaho went 2 of 12 on third down, and Oregon doubled them up on offensive production. I thought Jamari Caldwell and Derek Harmon in the middle were bright spots as you kind of build forward. Those two guys who transferred from Harmon from Michigan State and Caldwell from Houston are going to pay dividends. Caldwell was jumping the snap early, and he had Idaho on their heels for a lot of that game. Those two guys impact players out of the portal.
Yeah, I want to end my questions on a high note. So I wanted to ask, what was your impression of that defense, specifically that defensive line? I mean, you already talked about the two on the interiors, but at the defensive end position, you had multiple sacks from multiple guys. What'd you think of those young Bucks?
I think we did see a little bit of that growth from the young Bucks on the edges, right? Mateo Uiagalelei, in his back years, there were a couple plays that he's going to want back, right? Mainly the touchdown run by Jack Lane to give them 14 points, that second touchdown in the end zone. He got a hand on him, right? But he was playing with hair on fire. Tatum Tuioti is going to be a force to be reckoned with on the edge, and Blake Purchase coming back in, and kind of that body transformation that we're seeing from him. The edges are going to be a strength of this Oregon team as the season goes on. I thought they played really well today. But again, we look at this game, and I know that because you're the number 3 team in the country and you only won by 10 points, there is not a lot of, good taste in Duck fans' mouths right now. But at the same time, there were a lot of bright spots, especially on that defensive side of the ball, because when plays were needed to be made, you saw them. And the depth at corner is going to be really interesting. Nico Reed had a great play on the ball with the interception late in the game, and he also had a big play on the sideline. Tyshee Johnson in the second half came out and played exceptionally well, and I think that safety position could be really deep. We didn't hear a lot of Kobe Savage's name called, but I think that is also an instance of Kobe Savage was taking away a lot and not allowing himself to be in plays, which is a good thing for the Oregon secondary.
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, I think that I was excited to see some of the names that I wasn't expecting to stand out. I mean, we're still going to see more from Jabbar Muhammad. We're still going to see more from Kobe Savage. But Dusty, appreciate your insights, especially from the sidelines. We'll always continue to listen to you noon to 3, Danny and Dusty, and then of course you hear him on the sideline. And are you on the coaches show now? What's the show that you're on in Eugene now?
What? I don't. I'm not on. I don't know. I do my show Wednesday from Eugene.
That's what I'm saying.
Wednesday from Eugene.
That's what I'm
But
saying.
That's just noon to 3. I'm down every Wednesday.
How about this? How about this? Can you pump the program, please?
Yes, the program, the new podcast. Myself, Cole Linehan, former defensive lineman. We're 3 episodes in. The first episode we had Dan Lanning, Kobe Savage on. Second episode was a great deep dive into the career of Max Unger, one of the all-time great Oregon Ducks, where he opened up about everything from high school all the way through his 10-year career in the NFL. It was awesome. And then this past week, we caught up with Bryce Betcher, who, if you've never heard Bryce Betcher talk and you don't know much about his story, he's a fantastic young man and a really good talk. And then coming up this week, we'll have another interview that we're going to throw at you. Recap Idaho and take a look at Boise State, which was all gas, no brakes. And by brakes, I mean no defense, all offense in their opener this week. But there's one thing you said about Jabbar Muhammad. For a corner, the best thing that you can have is that nobody noticed you, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Because Jabbar Muhammad really thought of Jabbar Muhammad was he almost jumped a slant and picked it off, and the other one was when there's a blatant PI that was not called against him, and he got in the face of the DB and the official saying, how can you not call that pass interference, offensive pass interference? But I'm with you, Buck. I think we're going to see a lot of Jabbar Muhammad.
There's a lot of room for improvement, and they can certainly continue to go up from here. Dusty, we will look forward to talking to you around this time next week, hopefully in another victorious post-game show.
All right, fellas. We'll talk to you next week.
Drive safe back up this way. That is Dusty Harry. You hear him every week at 12 to 3 on Danny and Dusty. Coming up next on the Pacific Office Automation postgame show, a great question from the text line, the Vancouver Ford text line, that Will Ortner has an answer for. And believe it or not, with all this talk about new faces, there's actually a returning face to the Ducks roster and lineup that we haven't talked about yet today, and I think we should. We'll get to that. It's coming up next on the Pacific Office Automation postgame scoreboard show. But first, toss it over to Schultze with game day traffic and weather, brought to you every 10 minutes by Victorico's Mexican Food. Order Victorico's for your game day celebration in-store or online for pickup or delivery at victoricos.com.
Thank you, Buck. Looking at almost a clear drive now as you get up through Albany from Eugene, trying to get to Portland, although there is still, I would say, 10 minutes, maybe 15 now of slowing through Albany on I-5 North, and also a report of a Smoky a couple of miles still hanging around on I-5 North before that. But once you get past there, maybe tapping your brakes near Salem, and then a free and clear up to downtown Portland. Right now, 78 in Portland. The Ducks postgame forecast calls for a low of 62. Tomorrow, 87 and 80 degrees in Eugene next Saturday when the Ducks host Boise State.
Looking for a better primary care experience? Welcome to Zoom Care. Zoom Care is here for more than urgent needs. We can be your PCP too. Our primary care team has grown and is currently accepting new patients. Don't wait for the care you need. You can have your first visit with one of our many providers within 48 hours. And we take most insurances.
Formation from the left. Here's a pass. Got him open. Tez for the catch. Tez for the touchdown. Almost uncovered. Just either too much respect for Tez Johnson or just uncovered.
This is the Pacific Office Automation Postgame Scoreboard Show on the Odyssey app and your home for Ducks football. 1080 The Fan. Pacific Office Automation. Problem solved.
Welcome back to the Pacific Office Automation Post-Game Scoreboard Show. Ryan Buckley, Will Ortner, Jordan Schultz here with you. The Ducks victorious 24-14 over the Idaho Vandals. Didn't necessarily look the way we would have expected it to. And we do have some questions coming in on the Vancouver Ford text line, 503-8646-FAN. That's 503-8646-326. There we go. And the question is this: can you please talk about Dillon Gabriel and why he was so scared to run the ball today? I counted 4 times where he could have easily picked up or could have picked up an easy 10 and slid. I feel like that would have kept the Idaho defense more honest. That's a great question. Will, what say you?
I think there are 2 things here that could be true. One, I think that Coach Stein doesn't want his quarterback to run as much. He feels like, and the way that this offense is designed is more of it's a newer version of a pro-style offense. He wants the quarterback, in this case it's Dillon Gabriel, to go through reads. Where's your 1 option? Where's your 2 option? Where's your 3 option? Pre-snap, hey, determine what kind of coverage they're in. How do you beat it? Boom. It looks like it's an air raid, but it really is more pro-style. And so in that pro-style belief, they don't want the quarterback running as much because of a preservation. I also believe that after year 1, where Coach Dillingham had Bo Nix run a lot more, remember, in your rivalry game, in a big key spot, your quarterback got hurt, and it all went...
He was on the sideline for a 4th and 3 that Ty Thompson had to play. Notoriously, they didn't use a timeout that they could have, but it was a really tight and tough spot, all because your quarterback was a little bit nicked up from running the ball.
And he missed spots. Now, that being said, there are going to be times for Dillon Gabriel to hold onto the football and just run it yourself, right? Like last year, I want to say that Bo Nix had an 80-yard touchdown run in one of their games early on. So there's going to be opportunities for Gabriel to run, but I think in Coach Stein's offense, not only does Coach Stein not want the quarterback to run as much, I think that after the first year, Coach Lanning doesn't want the quarterback to run as much. And so I think at times when that gets kind of, I don't want to say beat into you, but really harped on, especially I feel that it gets harped on with Dillon. I think that is going to make him a little gun shy on running. Their whole philosophy is, we already have the athlete in space, just get it to the open athlete.
Now, so let me ask you this. Is there also, I guess, maybe room for improvement when it comes to identifying areas where you could run safely without putting yourself at risk? Because I think part of what this person's maybe asking is, okay, I'm not necessarily saying the parts where he would have to go and take huge contact, but could he or... It's mostly probably on Gabriel, less on the play caller, because you're talking about scramble type situations where it wasn't designed, but could Gabriel potentially improve, or could we see him run more if he's able to identify safer first downs or safer pickups, so to speak?
Yes, and I think that comes with getting more and more comfortable with the offense in live bullet situations. As comfortable as Dillon Gabriel can get in the offseason, and I think that Dillon Gabriel did everything that he can do to build up that chemistry and being comfortable in the offense and being comfortable with his play caller. I mean, shoot, the dude used his NIL money to buy a freaking minivan. Most kids that age are like, I'm getting X amount of money. What's the nicest sports car I can buy?
Where am I going to park my Lambo?
I would have done that. I would have bought a stick shift car, and I can't drive stick shift. I would have bought it and then figured it out from there. And you clearly have a kid with a good head on his shoulders who's like, I need to be around my offensive weapons as much as possible. It still changes when you get into a live game situation and live bullets are flying. And so I think that you are going to see Gabriel get more and more and more comfortable in the offense and what he can do. But I really do think that in the coaching staff's eyes, it is better for Gabriel to flip the ball out to a running back, to Jordan James, to Noah Whittington on a swing pass, than in their eyes to have him run for 10. Now, that swing pass might turn into 5, but it also could turn into a bigger play. And their eyes, we would rather have James take that hit. We'd rather have Whittington take that hit. We'd rather have Ferg take that hit on an out route or an in, a quick hitting route. We'd rather have those guys take those hits because that's what they're built for. Gabriel is built to be in the pocket and deliver those throws, and that's what they want. That doesn't mean he can't run.
Right.
It just means he'll run less.
And I think just picking and choosing your spots, that even if you could pick up a first down against Idaho, if there's even remotely a risk of you taking a shot that you don't need to, you don't do it.
Right.
And I think it can be as simple as that sometimes. You mentioned T. Ferg there for a second, Terrence Ferguson. I want to talk about the tight end position too, because
Deep.
Not only is it deep, but I think we're finally getting our first look at the beast that is Kenyon Sadiq.
Yeah.
I would like for this to become the Kenyon Sadiq show by the end of the year. That guy looks like he has a physical skill set unlike anything we've seen at a skill position player for the Oregon Ducks in a really long time. Like
He's a freak.
We've seen the way already that Will Stein wants to use him, and although the rushing attempts weren't successful, you heard them talking about the way they could use him, like a Brock Bowers. It looks like they're almost doing some Kyle Juszczyk type stuff like the Niners do, but with just a freak of an athlete. And then, of course, you still got Terrence Ferguson, who is pretty darn good last time I checked. I mean, I'm very fired up about what this core could be.
Well, and then Herbert's no slouch either. I mean, he kind of falls into the blocking tight end role now.
But he's a beast too, and he can surprise and contribute anytime in the pass catching game because most people are expecting him to block.
What Sadiq allows them to do is go into 13 personnel, which for those of you who don't know, that just means that they have one running back and then 3 tight ends. That's what the personnel there stands for. And the ability to have all 3 tight ends out, trust that all 3 tight ends can get their blocking assignments done, because when I noticed in this game, I didn't notice a lot of the tight ends losing their one-on-ones.
True.
Which that's a big deal, because usually if there is going to be, a run blocking breakdown, it's going to be from the tight ends. And I know that this is a little biased because I'm an offensive lineman, but when I think of tight ends, they spend 85% of their time doing their route running stuff, catching the ball. That's the fun things. That's what they want to do. Blocking is broccoli. You got to eat your broccoli, and they don't like to do it or do it as much. It's very clear that that's not how this Oregon offense is going to work. But the ability to hand the ball off on a fly sweep to Sadiq, the ability to use him as a fullback, and now he can be a run blocking fullback, or he can leak out into the pass game. And now it's Kenyon Sadiq on a linebacker. How does a linebacker cover Kenyon Sadiq? They don't. Oh, by the way, if you decide to waste a safety on him, that means that Terrence Ferguson is getting the linebacker now. How do you stop that 3-headed monster that you're going to have?
Well, and the other thing we saw today, we saw them throw him out into the flat from the slot, and then it was a DB on the edge trying to take him down. Yep. Good luck. He's got 40, 50, 60 pounds on you.
And there's no fat on him. Like, when they took when his first little play happened and they go into a close-up of Kenyon Sadiq, I audibly went, whoa.
Yeah, it was like that. And hopefully we could see that turn into even more production, because it was incredibly impressive just watching what I think is just a ton of untapped potential. I mean, I was excited thinking about all the things he could do. And it looks like, Will, you're checking out the Vancouver 4 text line one more time. Are you getting another follow-up from our question about Dylan Gabriel?
Yeah, so the question here is, there were a couple of times where it wasn't a designed run. Basically, there was pocket pressure on him. He could have just ran it for 5, and he tried to do the off-balance throw. That can also be a little bit more of a situation where Gabriel is pressing. You are supposed to blow out this Idaho team. Dylan Gabriel wasn't supposed to play in the 3rd and 4th quarter. For sure not the 4th quarter.
Yeah.
You were supposed to see Austin Novosad and maybe Dante Moore, right? I don't know how they're going to work his stuff because I think they still want to redshirt him. So you might not see a ton of him. He gets, he can
still play in 4 games. It'd be the stupidest thing if they don't.
Right. He gets 4 games, I believe. So there's funky things to do there. But what I believe in that situation there, it's Dylan Gabriel trying to make a play, or thinking he can make a play, a bigger play than him running. Hopefully, when you play Boise State, or as you go down the road, he realizes, hey, it's a better opponent. I need to just take what the defense is giving me and take the 5 yards here. So I think in those certain situations, that might have been more of a Dylan Gabriel, I need to make a big play because it's Idaho. I shouldn't still be playing this game right now.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Listen, I think that this is for Dylan Gabriel, this is his first. I mean, do you remember Bo Nix? Obviously, I guess it was against Georgia, not fair. But even Bo Nix's first couple games against the Patsies, the Cupcakes, like it doesn't always look great right away. Everyone's trying to get the feel right now, and I think that's going to come. We will talk a little bit coming up about Boise State and what they might be offering because they certainly look explosive. So they might be able to score if you can't, and need to see this Oregon offense turn it on a little bit. But there was one individual who had it going all day, and we need to introduce their game today, but also a new sponsored segment. It's the very best player of the game, and it's coming up next here on the Pacific Office Automation Postgame Scoreboard Show. But first, time for Ducks traffic and weather every 10 minutes, brought to you by Victorico's Mexican Food. Order Victoricos for your game day celebration in-store or online. Pick up or delivery at victoricos.com. Here's Schultze.
Appreciate it, Buck. We're seeing some slowing in Albany. Thought it was getting better, but now it looks like there's either a possible fender bender or hazard in the road making things worse. So expect maybe 20-plus minutes added to your drive through Albany. Some brake tapping again on I-5 North once you get a few miles past that. And looking near Woodburn at a Smoky. This is I-5 northbound just before you get to milepost 271. 78 in Portland. The Ducks postgame forecast calls for a low of 62. Tomorrow, 87 the high. It's 80 degrees in Eugene next weekend when the Ducks host Boise State.
For over 45 years, Pacific Office Automation has been providing winning strategies to help
Odyssey Station. This is the Pacific Office Automation Postgame Scoreboard Show on 1080 The Fan.
Throws, end zone, caught, touchdown. Trayshawn Holden with his 7th touchdown reception of the year.
It's time for the Bellagio's Pizza Very Best Player of the Game. Pay attention. Our expert panel will select the very best player of the game. Remember it, and when you hear the Text to Win cue in the noon hour of Tuesday's Danny and Dusty Show, you could win a free pizza from Bellagio's.
Yeah, how about that? New sponsor alert. Bellagio's Pizza on board.
I love Bellagio's Pizza.
I think I've only had it once. It was phenomenal. Clearly, now that they're a part of this program, we will need to make that happen a little bit more frequently. But yes, our first Bellagio's Pizza very best player of the game, as you heard in the imaging right there. If you text in with your cue to call in the noon hour of Danny and Dusty on Monday, you could win a chance to, or you could win a pizza from Bellagio's, but you have to have the very best player of the game. And it's someone we actually haven't talked about yet. He was super productive last season, and he picked up right where he left off. Who do we got, Will?
I've got Tez Johnson. He had 12 catches, 81 yards, 2 touchdowns. The last touchdown, I think, being the biggest, finding a way to get into the end zone. And I just feel like last year, and I've talked about this a lot today with transfers, where it takes them a moment to gel. And I feel like when Tez got over to Oregon, it took him about half the season. He'd have a game or two where he'd have a couple catches, but he never had any huge plays. Maybe he found a way to get in the end zone, but it didn't feel like he became the true Robin to Troy Franklin's Batman until about halfway through the season, and then he just exploded.
And then it was like you had 2 Batmans.
Exactly. And he picked up right where he left off. And I know that everyone's talking about Evan Stewart and Evan Stewart being the number 1 guy. And look, I want Evan Stewart to be the number 1 guy. But again, I think you have an opportunity of having 2 Batmans, because I think Tez Johnson, until someone takes it from him, is the number 1 guy, and he performed like that tonight. When you needed offensive production, he was the one who found his way into the end zone, not once, but twice, and I love him being a punt returner. He's going to get one this year.
12 catches, 81 yards, 2 touchdowns, only a long of 19, but the guy, he can run any kind of route you want, it seems like. It feels like you can hit him deep, you can hit him for a slant over the middle, you can swing it out to him, you can hit with the little flares, the back shoulder throws, pretty much all of it, they seem like he is able to get, and frankly, he was the one who was most obviously in rhythm with Dylan Gabriel early. So I don't know if that's just them both being vets, but I was thrilled when I found out he was coming back this season. And I did ask you before our show today, and I'm glad you brought it up, the punt returning thing. I feel like that is a kind of a time-honored debate in football. Do you put your most dynamic player back there, or do you say that's a position of risk because they could get hurt back there, and you don't put a player like Tez Johnson back there? He seems to be their returner number 1 right now. You said you like it, or you're into it. Like, just take me through your thought process of why you think that's good or bad, or neither.
I'm a big believer that when you have a guy who's special in space, just find a bunch of different ways to get him the ball in space, and that's just Tez Johnson. Like,
does that role come with any extra concern, though, or not really for you?
No, not really, because he's one of those guys where he could get hurt running a route. Like, he can get hurt at any moment. And so for me, it's just part of the game. So why would I take a guy out where, I'm limiting an injury concern of his, but let's say he returns 3 to 4 punts a game, multiply that out by 13, and I'm saving him from getting hit, I don't know, an extra 30, maybe 40 times. Is that really that big of a deal out through the entire season? Like, if he's my number 1 wide receiver, I want him to catch 8 balls a game minimum. So he's going to take a bunch of hits anyways. Let's just find a way to get the ball in his hands. And if he's banged up 1 week, well, then you take him out and you put Gary Bryant Jr. out there, right? You have other guys in that spot. But if you have a number 1 guy that you truly want returning kicks or returning punts, and they have some wiggle to them, they can get out in space, and if they get away from everyone, they're not going to get ran down from behind. You need to find a way to get them on those units. I'm not a believer in taking off certain players from special teams just because you're worried about them getting hurt.
Tez Johnson, your Bellagio's Pizza very best player of the game. Remember Tez Johnson for that noon hour cue to call during the Danny and Dusty show for your chance to win a Bellagio's pizza. Coming up, we're going to turn the page and see what Sports Sunday is going to look like. We'll talk with host Joe Fiser about tonight's game and what to expect on tomorrow's program that's coming up on the Pacific Office Automation Postgame Scoreboard show. But first, toss it back over to Schulte, who has the Victorico's traffic and weather, brought to you every 10 minutes by Victorico's. Order online for your game day celebrations in-store or online for pickup or delivery at victoricos.com.
Appreciate it, Buck. We're still looking at slowing through Albany. Just that late finish, unfortunately, keeping things a bit sluggish, adding at least 15 minutes to your drive, I-5 northbound, until you get past the Santiam Highway exit. And then looking at possible brake tapping as you get closer to Salem. Looking at a couple of Smokies, one just past the Shamawa Road exit, that's 263. And then you've also got one near Woodburn at milepost 271. 76 in Portland. The Ducks postgame forecast calls for a low of 62. Tomorrow, sunny with a high of 87. 80 degrees in Eugene next Saturday when they face Boise State.
Danny and Dusty on the Fan.
You are not supposed to call the police because the house that you share, like a boarding house, stinks next door because somebody isn't cleaning up their litter box. The recording goes, the cat got the house smelling bad. She trying to burn incense in here, and it's not getting better. It's getting worse, the smell, and it makes me sick to my stomach. I pay rent. I live here.
Landlord, not 911.
Danny and Dusty, weekdays noon to 3 on the Odyssey app and 1080 The Fan.
Dusty here for Victorico's Mexican Food to tell you about one of their new menu items, quesabirria. Tacos filled with birria-style beef and cheese with the side of birria sauce for dipping. Pick up your favorites in-store or online at victoricos.com.
Summer's just getting started, so fill your cooler with the smooth
Wait for Basso's snap. Good. Placement good. And the kick is on the way. And it's right down the middle.
This is the Pacific Office Automation Post-Game Scoreboard Show on the Odyssey app and your home for Ducks football. 1080 The Fan. Pacific Office Automation. Problem solved.
Welcome back to the Pacific Office Automation post-game scoreboard show. And before we get to Joe Fiser, who we have on the line, it is time for us once again to remind you about the Ducks Game Day Secret Score.
Ducks Game Day Secret Score.
Now, today's Ducks Game Day Secret Score is 83.7. That would be the passing completion percentage of one Dillon Gabriel. You don't need to remember specifically what it was from or the percentage point on the end, but 83.7. That's what you need when you hear the 7 a.m. cue to call on Mondays, Dirt and Sprague, and you could win a $100 gift card to Laurelhurst Steakhouse. And with that, we now bring on our friend Joe Fiser. You will hear him tomorrow morning on Sports Sunday. But right now, I want to ask you, Joe, your impressions of the new look Oregon Ducks, the Big Ten Oregon Ducks, the Oregon Ducks with so many new faces, and specifically their quarterback, Dillon Gabriel.
Everything's fine, nothing to worry about. We got the number one in the win column, no concerns, right? We're all gravy, right?
Sure.
Right? No, I mean, listen, dude, it was definitely an interesting game throughout. I mean, those first game jitters, you just hope that's the case. I believe, the first time's an accident, second time's a coincidence, 3 times is a trend. So you hope that next week against Boise State, a lot of the things you saw today are the concerns are quelled and that some of them just don't creep over to the next week, and especially on the offensive line. I think that's one of the biggest concerns is what you saw tonight is, Dillon Gabriel did a great job finding his spots, picking his spots, not forcing anything, but a lot of drives that kind of felt stalled out because of him not being able to make plays because he didn't have as much time. The fumble in the first half because he got sacked down in the red zone. So it was, we're not going to sugarcoat it. There was much to be desired on the defensive end or on the offensive end, especially on the O-line. But, as I say, defensive side, that was really the shining part of the day. That really made things a little bit more palatable to me, but plenty to clean up, especially in the trenches on the offensive side.
Who stood out to you on the defensive side? You have a lot of new faces, new transfers, specifically in that secondary and a couple in the D-line. Who jumped out the most to you?
Mateo Uyunglele was one. Getting those 2 sacks. He just looks big too. I don't know if he grew a couple inches and how much weight he put on this summer, but he just looked like a man down there. And we've always obviously been hyped about him since he committed to Oregon a couple of years ago. But he made his presence felt. And then obviously Jordan Burch. He's a stalwart on that defensive line, and I believe, I don't know, they converted a couple third downs in the second half. That's right. But for that first half, I think they were 0 for 5. And take away a couple trick plays from that Idaho offense. This is essentially pretty much a shutout for this team, right? So Idaho Vandals had a nice drive that they strung together to give them their second touchdown of the day. But the defensive line, those 2 guys, especially Jordan Burch and Uyunglele, those were the most impressive parts to me. They made their presence felt, and that defensive line and the defense in general is just going to keep them in a lot of games this year. So if anything, that's the biggest positive that I take from this game is that defense looks really impressive against a team that they should have looked that way against. It's just that defense gave the offensive chances, and we just couldn't come through on that side of the ball. But if the defense can play like that week in and week out, I feel really good about this team.
Now, Joe, outside of the Ducks game, we had a monster slate of college football today. We're also getting into the home stretch of the baseball season. What are we going to be discussing? And obviously, next week, week 1 of the NFL season. What's going down on Sports Sunday tomorrow? What are you fired up to talk about?
Yeah, man. With the official week 1 of college football, I just love going around and looking at all the games and all the happenings of what we saw throughout, the top 25 matchups and the non-top 25 matchups, I think it's good to compare and contrast, especially with this Ducks team, as far as what you saw in the top 10, what was happening around you. Are we going to be completely surprised if they don't drop down a couple spots? I don't want to overreact too much from that, but you look at what the top teams in the country did. Texas hung a 52-0 spot on Colorado State.
Yep.
You had Alabama just absolutely crush Western Kentucky 63-0, and you struggled with an FCS team. Plain and simple. They were in it in the fourth quarter. So I mean, I don't know what the AP coaches poll and all that are going to feel, and if they're just going to kind of take this as a one-game sample size. But I like to look at what everybody else did around the country, and there were some teams that started a little slow. The Michigan, Florida State, or Fresno State game, they kind of got it going towards the end there. But I just like looking at the full opening slate of what we saw in college football. And then, we got to get ourselves ready for NFL because literally it is less than a week away on Thursday. And then we get our Friday Brazil game. I mean, it is here. It is. I knew football season was here officially when I was cooking wings this afternoon on the barbecue. I was like, okay, this is like the christening of the football season when you have barbecue wings. And so it's here, baby. We made it.
That's what I'm talking about. Looking forward to Sports Sunday with Joe Fiser tomorrow morning. And Joe, appreciate your time as always and willingness to give us your breakdown on the Ducks and everything else that's going on.
Yeah, appreciate you, fellas, and I'll see you later this week.
Thanks, Joe.
All right, when we come back on the Pacific Office Automation Scoreboard Show, it's time that we take a look around the scoreboard of the Big Ten and the rest of the country. As I said, a full slate of games that we're fired up about. Some interesting results, some blowout results. We will get to all of it coming up. But first, Ducks Game Day traffic and weather brought to you every 10 minutes by Victorico's Mexican Food. Order Victorico's for your game day celebration in-store or online. Pick up or delivery at victoricos.com. Here's Schultz.
Appreciated, Buck. Still looking at slowing through Albany. Expect an extra 15 minutes. I-5 northbound getting out of the Eugene area past Albany up to Salem. Other than that, seeing all that clearing up north of there to Salem. No more brake tapping there. Just one Smoky remaining. Actually, it just went off the map. If it is still there, it'd be near milepost 271 passing Woodburn. Right now, 75 in downtown Portland. The Ducks Game Day forecast calling for a low of 67 tonight. Tomorrow, 87 for a high.
Window Nation customers have been singing our praises
and goal from the 4-yard line. And they're going to wildcat it. Nope, they kept it. Going right, going to score. Walked it in. Jack Lane.
This is the Pacific Office Automation Postgame Scoreboard Show on the Odyssey app and your home for Ducks football. 1080 The Fan. Pacific Office Automation. Problem solved.
Keep things rolling here on the Pacific Office Automation Postgame Scoreboard Show. The number 3 Ducks winners 24-14 over Idaho. Not the prettiest of games, especially on the offensive side of the ball, but I think that we have picked that bone clean as far as things that need to be changed, adjusted, and that we might see a better performance next week. I think it's time for us now to look around the rest of the college football scoreboard. And there wasn't really anything out there from a major source of upsets or anything like that today. But we did have a couple marquee games. We had Notre Dame versus Texas A&M with the Fighting Irish winning that one by a touchdown down at Kyle Field in College Station. The marquee matchup was the number 1 Georgia Bulldogs against number 14 Clemson. Oh my, that was a 6-point game at the half. It ended being a 31-point game. Ohio State ends up rolling. That kind of, and so did Texas. So that essentially makes up your top 4 or 5 with Alabama putting up 63 on Western Kentucky as well.
Saw Arch Manning today for the first time.
We saw some Arch Manning. So I was going to ask you guys, what stood out from the first full slate of college football? And by the way, Will has continued to update me on the stats of one T-Mac McMillan from Arizona, who is going nuts right now against the New Mexico Lobos.
Yeah, hold on. I pulled up his stats. He's at 9 receptions for 285 yards and 4 touchdowns.
And there's still 18 minutes left in that game. And it's only a 10-point game.
Absolutely insane. So he's going to get more and more and more. So the games that stood out to me, look, there's a little bit of gambling brain here that's always going to work in with me. Iowa still hitting the under is hilarious because the under for their game was 40.5. They scored 40. They held Southern Illinois to 0 points. But what cracked me up the most about it was they scored 31 of their 40 points in the second half, and it was a record for most points in a half by the team. Hilarious.
Look at the Hawkeyes, man.
Hilarious. And then the other one that really stood out to me was the upset by Vanderbilt.
Sure.
Everyone was talking about the Virginia Tech Hokies being kind of that dark horse in the ACC, especially after Florida State lost, because everyone kind of marked this Clemson game as going to be a loss. If they could keep it close and cover the spread, then you might say, hey, well, Clemson's getting back to where they were. And in reality, you just saw Georgia start their revenge tour and just absolutely bludgeon them. So then there's talk of, well, hey, maybe Virginia Tech, maybe Georgia Tech, maybe NC State. These teams could end up jumping into this spot, and maybe we have a surprise winner. And they just didn't show up against Vanderbilt. Diego Pavia was fantastic. They found a way to win that game in overtime. It was awesome. Really enjoyed watching that game.
Shout out Dave Bartu for being on Vandy early in the week, for also saying to sprinkle the money line. That was a 4-1 hit. But a couple other scores of note. Oregon State played today. They hosted Idaho State. They win that one 38-15. Will is wearing an Idaho State shirt. Was it a cousin's a tight end?
That's my cousin. No, my cousin's a slot receiver. Adam Watts, number 89.
I threw down a bet in the first quarter for Idaho State to cover. At the time, it looked good. That was actually one that stuck out to me. The other one was number 19 Miami over Florida. Cam Ward looking pretty good in Mario Cristobal's system. I think he threw for like
Cam
almost
Ward
400
great
yards today. Like,
so did Martinez.
I don't trust Cristobal, but Cam Ward looks really good.
I almost feel like Cristobal now has like 2 of the best players in the most important positions. It's like he can't screw this up, right?
He could definitely screw it up. But I think the biggest get, as big as Cam Ward is of a get for Miami, I actually would say that Damian Martinez is the bigger get for them, because you're going to have bad Cam Ward games. So you need that other fastball, that change up that can work alongside. We also know Mario Cristobal. What does he want to do? He wants to run the football. He's an old school O-lineman where he's almost got that theory still in his head. 3 things happen when you throw the ball and 2 of them are bad.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that he has the best running back, maybe not the best running back in college football, but he definitely got the best one out of the portal. He got a top 5 running back in college football. And Damian Martinez picked up where he left off last year for Oregon State, just kind of running all over that Florida team. I think that's a bigger get for him because in crunch time and big moments, he can lean on what he wants to lean on, and that's his run game.
Well, let's talk about what the Ducks have on tap next week, as well as what next week's opponent did today. They were in an absolute shootout down south. We'll discuss that next on the Pacific Office Automation Postgame Scoreboard Show. But first, it's Ducks game day traffic and weather every 10 minutes, brought to you by Victorico's Mexican Food. Order Victorico's for your game day celebration in-store or online for pickup or delivery at victoricos.com.
Thanks, Buck. It's clearing up through Albany, still though slowing. I-5 northbound, maybe an extra 10 minutes now through that area. And looking pretty free and clear up through Salem and to Portland. Still a possible sighting of a smoky near milepost 271 through Woodburn. Right now you're looking at 78 in downtown Portland, 76 now. The low for tonight is 67, a high of 87 tomorrow with some clouds.
Our Labor Day savings start now at Lowe's. Right now.
Wrapping things up here on the Pacific Office Automation post-game scoreboard show. Ryan Buckley, Will Ortner, Jordan Schultz with you here all night. And we're going to turn the page, look ahead to Boise State. And boy, they went down to Georgia to take on Georgia Southern, and that game was a wild one. I actually watched some of that before the Ducks game today. 56-45 your final, 101 points scored, and Boise State victorious. They were the ones putting up the 56. So at the very least, you know you're bringing an explosive offense to Autzen Stadium next weekend. Tell me what you know about this program, what you know about this team, and what your expectations are for next week.
Yeah, look, I mean, Maddox Madsen is he's a fine quarterback. He's not great. He's not going to light the world on fire, but he's going to be able to get the job done. He does a good job of not turning the ball over, finding the open receivers. But where they're really going to make their hay is Boise State, is in this rushing game. They had 35 rushes against Georgia Southern, and I understand it's Georgia Southern. It's not going up against Oregon. They ran for 371 yards. Their starting running back, Ashton Genty, he had 20 carries, 267 yards, and 6 touchdowns. And if you haven't seen the highlight tape, go and watch the highlight tape. This isn't the offensive line is blowing dudes out of the water. This is the offensive line getting hat on a hat, and then your running back hitting the circle button 2 or 3 times, juking out the linebacker, then the free safety, then the strong safety, then hauling as fast as he can to the end zone. They have a slippery dude over there, and you're going to need all of your defensive line and all of your linebackers to really get after them to slow them down and to win this game. And frankly, it's not about winning this Boise State game anymore. It's about it looking the way that this Idaho game really should have looked. I understand that this Boise State team is a team that some people are picking as a the get-in team, the group of 5 team that gets into the playoff and can be that 12. They won't be the 12th best team in the country. They'll be ranked, maybe, if they're the team that gets in there through the group of 5. So if you are Oregon, you need to right the wrongs that you did from this last week. And the way that you do that offensively is you cut way down on the penalties, specifically on the false start and the illegal formation penalties. Those are simple focus mistakes, and they can be fixed tomorrow. And then when it comes to the chemistry and the building camaraderie on the offensive line, not missing blitzing backers, not getting caught off guard by twists, if you can go into the next game and you can at least show us that, well, hey, they got beat by 2 twists instead of by 5. Hey, they had 1 or 2 glaring missed assignments instead of 5 or 6 that they had in this game. If you can come into next week and really show that offensive line has done a better job of gelling and not making the stupid mistakes, I think that you can do that, and you can look more like the Oregon team that we expected you to look like against Idaho.
Schultz, expectations for next week?
I mean, I just hope that Oregon actually shows up. I'm not really looking at Boise State. That they're kind of they're on everybody's radar as like the possible like king killer, right? I'm not so sure that they can beat Oregon, but if Oregon doesn't show up and maybe like start fast in the first quarter like we saw a few different times last season, and Oregon, can they play a 48-minute game or a 60-minute game in football terms? No, because they can't ever come out flying either the first half or the second half. So they got to come out, play a 60-minute game, and actually be ready next week.
Look ahead line, Oregon favored by 24.5. Maybe seems a little high, but that'll be
go bet that. Go bet the under. I don't know.
But the over at 61.5. But kickoff a late one next week at Autzen, a 7 p.m. kickoff. We will of course be with you on game day all next week for pregame coverage all the way through the Pacific Office Automation post-game show. No Ducks Roundtable this week. We are off for Labor Day. For Will Ortner, for Jordan Schultz, for Dusty Hara, Anthony Newman, and Joe Fiser, thank you for joining us on the Pacific Office Automation post-game scoreboard show.
This has been the Pacific Office Automation post-game scoreboard show, brought to you by Coors Light.